Hello everyone and welcome to another video on Python programming. In this video I will introduce you to the concept of iterations in Python, and we will be speaking in specific about the indefinite iteration in Python, otherwise known as the while loop. So let's look at what an iteration means. An iteration is executing the same block of code over and over, potentially many times. A programming structure that implements an iteration is called a loop. Now in programming, we have two types of iterations, definite and indefinite iterations. And in this example, we will be speaking about indefinite iterations. Indefinite iterations in Python is the while loop, where we use the while keyword to define an indefinite iteration. So let's look at the basic syntax. As you can see, this is the basic syntax where we have the while keyword followed by an expression and again the colon, and below that is something indented. Again, we encounter indentations just like in if-else statements, a set of statements where what happens here is, following the while keyword, we have this expression where this expression is evaluated in a Boolean context. Again, we check if this expression evaluates true or false, and if it is true, we execute all the statements or the statement block that is indented below this while statement. This is another example of control structure, much like if and else statement blocks, where we use a lot of indentation. So let's look at a basic example now of while loop. So let's copy this example and let's see what this does. So I have a variable n where I am assigning it a value 0. This is called an initializing process, and it's very important to note that most while loops consist of an expression which contains a variable, a control variable, which is usually initialized prior to starting the loop, and then this control variable is typically modified somewhere within the main loop body. So in this case, my control variable is n, and I am initializing it by assigning it the value 0. So let's move into the loop now. So the loop has this while keyword, as you can see, followed by an expression n lesser than or equal to 5. Now what this is an expression which is going to check if it's true or false. Is n lesser than or equal to 5? And as long as this expression is true, we will continue doing whatever is indented below this while statement. And what is below this while statement is a print statement, first of all, which says value of n is, and it basically prints the value of n in that particular iteration. And as you can see, this compound assignment where we add the value of n by 1 and we assign it back to n. So what this is, let's see what this does actually. Let's execute this and see what this does. Important to note, the value of n again is initialized at 0. So this while loop will keep going on until the value of n remains lesser than or equal to 5. So as you can see, I have the execution of this particular block of code or this while loop where I get the multiple different iterations of this print statement that you can see here. The first iteration, it says value of n is 0. Then it says value of n is 1. What I'm doing is I'm writing the value of n multiple times, and each time the value of n is written over here based on what iteration it is. So what is happening actually is that initially the value of n is 0, and I print the statement value of n is 0. Now I add the value of what is in n by 1. So now what is the value of n? So again we do this check. So after this first iteration, we come back, like once this whole block of code is executed, we again come back to this expression and we again check if this statement is true. So now that the value of n is actually 1, this statement is still true. So again we execute this, and that you can see over here, value of n is 1. Now again we add the value of n by 1, and again we go back here once this block is executed, and we check if this statement is true again. And as you can see, the value of n when it's 2 is still making sure that this expression is true. And this keeps happening until the value of n is greater than 5. So once the value of n becomes 6, this condition is no longer met. And finally, we do not execute this statement because this expression evaluates to false, and we do not do this anymore, and we finally leave our while loop. So let's check what the value of n is just to confirm this. As you can see, the value of n is indeed 6, and that is why we have left this while loop over here. So this is an example of a basic while loop where we check for this an expression. If it evaluates to true, we evaluate everything within it. Once this is done, we go back and we evaluate this expression again. If it is again true, we again go back and do whatever is indented within it. And we keep doing this until the expression gives us false. And interestingly, we don't necessarily have to define these control variables always. We can actually use iterables, and we will learn about iterables actually in a future video. But we can use iterables, and an example of an iterable is the list. So let's look at this list and let's look at this whole block. Alright, so I created this list A, which contains 5 objects, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all integer objects. And I have another variable x where I store the integer 1. Now this while statement, now it might look confusing. Now it says while A. Now what is A? Well, A is not your typical expression where you're making sure if some condition is being met or not. But this, the way you read this is while A exists. So in the context of a list, as long as A, which is a list, contains objects within it, A is true. If it does not have any objects within it, A is false. So while A, basically what it means is while A has objects within it. And if it does have objects within it, or as long as it does, we continue executing whatever is indented within this while statement. And this while statement is a print statement. Again, we we have this value x where we're doing we're printing this is iteration number, and we pass x. So the first iteration will obviously pass x is equal to 1, and then we add x by 1, and then the second iteration should pass this is iteration number 2, and then so on. And finally, we have another statement within this block called the pop statement, where we're popping the elements of A. Now, as if you would have seen the video on lists, the pop statement removes the rightmost value from a list. So if I do a.pop, initially it will remove 5 from this list, and I will have the rest of them. Again, if I do pop, it will remove 4 from this list, and then you will have the rest of these. So let's actually see. We'll actually check what's left in this list each time we do this pop statement. So I'll also print the list A during each iteration, and let's see what happens over here. As you can see, what is happening out here is while A has elements, we are going to continue doing this while statement, whatever is within it. So in the first iteration, obviously we have all of it, and it is iteration number 1. And as you can see, the list contains everything. Then I pop it. Then iteration number 2, it again has elements, but it has lost its rightmost element. And this keeps on happening until the list finally has no elements left. And once the list has no elements left, this expression while A evaluates to false, and we do not execute this anymore, and we leave the while loop. And again, let's check what is in A. A should have no elements. As you can see, it's an empty list. When I checked what's in A, it's an empty list, and that is why while A returned me a false, and we did not print any further. So this is an example of using a while statement using lists. And of course, the next topic would be discussing nested while loops. And this is a broad topic. What I mean by this is that when I'm saying nested while loops, I'm actually talking about nested control structures. So we can have while loops within while loops. Not only that, we can have if and else statements within while loops. We can have while loops within if and else statements, and we can have if and else statements within if and else statements. So if you think of all of these loops, and we will even speak about for loops in another video. For loops again are a type of control structure. So all of these are control structures. While loops are control structures. For loops are control structures. If and else statements are control structures. All of these are control structures, and nesting can happen within them, and it does not matter which is the parent of the nest and then the child of the nest. You can have a while loop within an if and else statement. You can have for loops within a while loop. All of this is valid in Python, and it's one of the great features of Python that is very flexible in this way. So let's look at an example where I have a while loop within another while loop. So I'm copying this piece of code where I have this list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and another list first and second. Now my first while loop, I print what is popped from A. So I take A, then I pop the 0th index. So basically from the left hand side, and I print what is that. Alright. And then I have another while loop where I have this list B, and I'm doing the same thing. But this while loop is within the first while loop, and let's see what happens out here. So as you can see, my first iteration of this parent while loop causes me to pop what is the first element, which is 1. Then I do these while loops, and this is completely executed, and only then do I go back to this first one, and then I come back and do all of this again. Then I go back to this one, and then I come back and do all of this again. And that's why you can see this repetition. So I have this first iteration, and then I do the second while loop. Then I have the second iteration, and then I do the second while loop, and I keep doing this. And this is an example of a nested while loop. Okay, so our next topic in this video would be break and continue statements. Now, break and continue statements are ways to abruptly end iterations in a particular loop. You can use break and continue statements not only in while loops, but you can use it also in for loops. So let's look at how we use it in while loops. And let's look at what we mean by break and continue statements first of all. Well, the break statement terminates the loop entirely. So once the break statement is found, the complete while loop that we are using is completely terminated. And the continue statement, on the other hand, terminates only the current loop iteration, and it goes back to the beginning or the expression, and it checks whether the expression or the controlling expression is again reevaluated, and it is checked whether the loop will execute again or terminate. This pictorial that you can see here actually emphasizes, or it shows the difference between break and continue. So I have this while loop and I have an expression. Alright, I have a bunch of statements and I have a break command over here and I have a continue command over here. So if I encounter the break command, it will not execute any of this. In fact, it will not execute this while statement at all, and it will move on to the next piece of code that we have. But a continue statement, if a continuous statement is encountered in a while loop, will not completely break away, but it will not execute the rest of the statements in that iteration, only these two, but it will go back here, it will check this expression again, and again we will do this all over again. So this is this small difference between the break and continue statements, but both are used to abruptly end an iteration in a loop. So let's look at an example of how we use the break statement. So I will use this example where I have initialized some controlling variable n to 0. My first loop will check whether n is less than or equal to 5. If this is true, then I will print this statement. Then what I'm doing over here is I am incrementing it by 1. Now in my earlier example using the similar example, I had no, this part was not there. So what you got was, I was printing the value of n. So it was printing as value of n is 0 and then 1 and then 2 and then 3, 4 and 5. But over here I've included I've nested an if statement, and within that I put a break statement. And this if statement is checking if n is equal to 2. So once n is 2, I move on to this and I do the break statement. So let's see what happens now. As you can see, when I've executed this, I don't get the whole value of n is 0 and then 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5. I stop at 1, and that is because once n is equal to 2, I actually do not execute this while loop again. I do not go back and execute print value of n is 2 now. In fact, I break from this whole while loop, and my while loop terminates right then and there. And that's why you only get these two iterations, value of n is 0 and then value of n is 1. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a neat example of what happens, or what is the difference between a break and a continue statement. Okay. So let's go back to our initial example where we're printing this value of n is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. But I've added one more statement where I print hello at each iteration. So let's see what happens when I do this. As you can see, it will print hello after each of whatever I was doing already. Now let's introduce our break statement first of all. So when I do break, well, let's go back to this if statement. If we check this condition, then we break. Let's see what happens now. As you can see, something interesting has happened where we have this first iteration completely being executed, but the second iteration kind of stops where there's no hello, and that is because we have broken from this while loop before the second iteration's hello was printed. Let's see the difference between a break and continue now. So now I have this continue statement instead of a break. Let's see what happens here. As you can see, it seems familiar to our first example where we did not have any break or continue. But there is a small difference that I want you to catch, and that is very important about this continue statement. So as you can see, the first iteration has value of n is 0 and then hello. Then value of n is 1, but there is no hello. And this is because once this condition is actually met, we do not move on to this statement, but we go back to this expression and we evaluate this expression. And then once we evaluate this expression again and it's found to be correct, we do everything the same again where we print hello. But except for that one step where this if statement was met and we did continue, and this following statement was not executed. And that happens only for one iteration, and that is when n is equal to 2. And as you can see, that is what happens over here. In one of the iterations, we miss a hello, and that is the difference of the continue statement between, that is the difference of the continue statement with the break statement. So this concludes it for our video on indefinite iterations. I hope you learned about while loops and indefinite iterations, and I hope you really enjoyed this video and learned something from it. And as always, do drop a like, subscribe to our channel. This helps us reach new viewers. And once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.